Rain settles softly against the tall windows, blurring the lights along the Thames into muted streaks of gold and gray. And somewhere down the corridor a clock marks the hour with a restrained chime that seems less concerned with announcing time than with acknowledging its quiet passing. By the time you notice it, you have already grown accustomed to the hush, the particular London hush that belongs to late evenings in government buildings where decisions are seldom dramatic, but always deliberate. Your name has long since been entered into files tied with ribbon, the paper weighty and faintly textured beneath careful handwriting and measured annotations. The vetting process did not feel like an ordeal. It felt, rather, like a gradual narrowing of light, a series of conversations that revealed less about what you would do and more about who you were when left unobserved. Questions arrived politely. Pauses lingered longer than expected. You learned that silence is not empty. It is often where the real assessment takes place. Nothing about entry into the service resembles spectacle. There are no speeches, no swelling music, no ceremonial declarations. Instead, there is a quiet understanding conveyed across a polished desk beneath the glow of a soft lamp. You are now entrusted with something that will never belong to you, yet will shape your days for years to come. The early weeks are marked by observation. You notice how doors close gently, never abruptly, how conversations lower themselves instinctively when someone new enters the room, how tea arrives precisely when discussion grows dense, as though civility itself is part of the architecture. You begin to understand that intelligence work here is less about dramatic discovery and more about patient accumulation. Fragments of insight gathered over months, sometimes years, until a pattern emerges with the inevitability of tide against stone. There are training sessions, of course, but they are conducted without flourish. You sit in rooms lined with shelves and framed maps that seem older than anyone present. The language is careful. Judgment, one senior officer remarks, not looking at notes, is rarely about speed. The statement hangs in the air, understated yet absolute. You are taught to listen beyond words, to observe the shift in posture during a diplomatic reception, to notice what is not included in a report as much as what is written plainly. Yet, even this learning unfolds gently. No one speaks of secrets with excitement. Secrets here are heavy, almost administrative in their gravity. They require maintenance, like archives or gardens, tended, reviewed, occasionally pruned. Your first badge grants access to corridors that echo faintly underfoot. You become familiar with the way evening light reflects off the river and slips through blinds, striping conference tables in pale silver. London itself becomes part of your orientation. The muffled rumble of buses across Westminster Bridge, the soft glow of street lamps in Whitehall, the way mist lingers above the embankment just before dawn. In meetings, you rarely speak. This is by design. You are learning cadence, when a point is introduced, how it is tested, how it is reframed without confrontation. British restraint is not absence of opinion. It is opinion delivered with such calm that disagreement feels almost courteous. You watch as senior officers phrase critique as inquiry. Might we consider, someone suggests, and the entire direction of discussion shifts without a single raised voice. There is paperwork, more than you anticipated. Reports drafted, revised, redrafted again. Margins filled with pencil notes in tidy script. You begin to appreciate that clarity is a form of respect. Respect for colleagues who must rely on your words long after you have left the room. Each sentence must endure scrutiny not because anyone seeks fault, but because the consequences of ambiguity ripple quietly outward. Outside, seasons change almost imperceptibly. Rain gives way to pale winter sunlight, then to a hesitant spring. Your work remains steady. Much of it involves synthesis, bringing together assessments from different desks, aligning timelines, gently flagging inconsistencies. You are not yet shaping policy. You are learning the discipline that precedes it. Occasionally, you are invited to observe meetings with external partners. The rooms are modest, the conversations courteous. There are no theatrics. You sit slightly back from the table, notebook open, pen poised. You notice how carefully phrased assurances can carry both reassurance and caution in the same breath. You see how long-standing relationships are maintained through consistency rather than charm. The culture of the service reveals itself gradually. Praise is subtle, a nod across the table. An email sent late in the evening. Sound work? No exclamation marks, no grand commendations. The absence of fuss is, in its way, an expression of trust. If you are here, you are expected to be capable. Competence is assumed, not applauded. And with that assumption comes responsibility, not the dramatic responsibility of crisis, but the quieter burden of stewardship. Information passes through your hands that cannot be discussed at dinner tables, cannot be hinted at among friends. You grow accustomed to carrying conversations home in silence. The discipline is not oppressive. It is simply part of the landscape, like the steady drizzle that so often accompanies your walk to the underground. There are moments of doubt. Not about danger, that is rarely immediate, but about adequacy. Are your assessments balanced enough? Have you weighed optimism against caution with sufficient care? In this institution, certainty is regarded with suspicion. You learn to phrase conclusions with measured confidence, leaving room for revision. On balance, you write, with moderate confidence. These qualifiers are not weakness, they are honesty. You begin to sense that intelligence is less about uncovering the unknown than about reducing uncertainty by degrees so small they are almost invisible. A percentage point here, a clarified timeline there. The accumulation matters. It always matters. Late one evening, long after most lights have dimmed, you remain at your desk reviewing a briefing. The building is nearly silent. Footsteps echo distantly, then fade. You pause, listening to the rain against glass, and feel, not excitement, but steadiness. The awareness that you are part of a continuum, stretching back decades, forward into years you cannot yet imagine. Entry into the service does not transform you overnight. It refines you slowly. You become more patient in conversation, more attentive to nuance, more comfortable with incomplete answers. Friends may notice you consider your words longer before speaking. They may not understand why, and you cannot explain. Your supervisors rarely speak about loyalty in grand terms. Instead, loyalty is embedded in process, in the insistence on verification, in the careful handling of documents, in the quiet protection of colleagues' efforts. Trust is built incrementally, just as analysis is. Over tea in the canteen one afternoon, a senior colleague remarks, almost casually, "The work is rarely dramatic, it is simply necessary." You carry that sentence with you. Necessary, not glamorous, not heroic, necessary. As months turn into your first year, you recognize the subtle shift within yourself. The instinct to react has softened into the habit of reflection. You find satisfaction in precision, in balanced judgment, in contributing a paragraph that clarifies rather than complicates. There is a quiet pride in anonymity, in knowing that outcomes may improve without your name ever being attached. The Thames continues its patient flow outside the windows. Governments change. Headlines rise and fall. Within these discrete walls, the rhythm remains measured. Files are opened, considered, closed. Conversations begin and conclude with courtesy. And you, still near the beginning, Understand that advancement here is not marked by spectacle, but by deepening trust. The foundation of your career is not built on daring exploits, it is built on listening, on restraint, on the humility to recognize that intelligence work is often invisible precisely because it has been done well. The clock chimes again, softly, and you close the final folder of the evening. There is no sense of ending, only continuation, the steady unfolding of responsibility that asks for patience above all else. In this quiet beginning, you learn the most enduring lesson of the service. That influence is most powerful when exercised without display, and that the true work often happens in silence, long before anyone else notices. The rain has become so familiar that you no longer register it as weather, only as atmosphere, a soft percussion against the windows that accompanies the steady hum of printers and the muted turning of pages. Months have passed since those first cautious days of listening, and now your name appears more frequently in internal distribution lists, your drafts less heavily annotated, your presence in meetings less peripheral. You are no longer only observing, you are contributing. The shift is subtle. It arrives not with announcement but with expectation. A briefing paper lands on your desk with a short note. Would value your view. There is no instruction beyond that, no prescription of angle or tone. The trust implied in those 4 words carries more weight than any formal promotion. Your responsibilities widen quietly. You begin liaising more directly with colleagues overseas, your correspondence measured and courteous, phrased in language that conveys both clarity and respect. Time zones become part of your rhythm. Early mornings, when London is still pale and hushed, you read cables sent in the small hours. Late evenings, you draft responses that will reach distant desks by dawn. Travel enters your work in understated ways. Commercial flights booked without fuss. Hotels chosen for discretion rather than grandeur. You move through airports not as someone seeking intrigue, but as a professional among many others, carrying nothing more conspicuous than a slim briefcase and a thoughtful expression. In foreign capitals, meetings unfold in modest offices and quiet cafes where conversation remains measured. You are careful to blend into the cadence of each setting, aware that listening is still your primary instrument. The skill you cultivate is not persuasion, but calibration, adjusting tone, pace, and emphasis according to context. You speak plainly, never hurried. You take notes sparingly, trusting memory shaped by careful attention. There are long stretches of waiting, waiting for a reply, waiting for confirmation, waiting for clarity. At first, the waiting feels uncertain, as though productivity must be visible to be real. But gradually you understand that patience is itself a form of labor. Decisions taken too soon can reverberate for years. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not absence. It is space for consideration. Back in London, the Thames glides beneath low clouds, and you return to a desk that now feels unmistakably yours. The polished wood bears faint impressions where your wrists rest while reading. The desk lamp casts a steady amber circle that narrows the world into manageable dimensions. Within that circle, complexity becomes paragraphs. Paragraphs become assessments. Assessments become part of something larger than you can see. You begin to sense how information moves through the service like a quiet current. Your reports feed into broader analyses. Your observations are integrated, compared, weighed against others. Rarely do you see the final product in its entirety, yet you understand your contribution matters precisely because it is one thread in a carefully woven fabric. Colleagues treat you differently now. Still polite, always composed, but with an ease that signals inclusion. In meetings, you're asked directly, "What's your reading?" The question is simple. The answer requires balance. Enough conviction to be useful, enough humility to remain open to revision. You learn to speak without overstating, to offer judgment without embellishment, to accept that ambiguity will often remain. The culture rewards steadiness over brilliance. A consistently sound assessment earns more respect than a dramatic insight delivered once. There are moments abroad when you feel the weight of representation, not as a grand patriotic swell, but as quiet accountability. Your conduct reflects the service. Your restraint signals reliability. In understated conference rooms, over porcelain cups of tea or small Dematas coffee, you practice the art of measured conversation. You avoid unnecessary disclosure. You resist the temptation to fill silence. You allow others to reveal themselves at their own pace. The work expands beyond analysis into relationship management, though even that phrase feels too bold. It is, rather, the careful tending of professional acquaintance. Emails exchanged on national holidays acknowledging local customs. Handwritten notes following particularly constructive meetings. Remembering details that demonstrate attention without intrusion. Back in London, evenings often stretch longer. The building grows quiet around you as floors empty one by one. Cleaning staff move discreetly through corridors. Somewhere, a kettle clicks off. You remain at your desk reviewing a summary, aware that responsibility has deepened. The material passing before you is more sensitive now, its implications broader. And yet there is still no spectacle, no raised voices, no urgent footsteps, no dramatic declarations. Instead, there is accumulation, incremental trust, a growing sense that your judgment is being tested gently, repeatedly, and with purpose. Occasionally, you accompany a senior officer to a meeting, observing not as a newcomer, but as a developing peer. You watch how they frame difficult topics without confrontation, how disagreement is expressed as inquiry, how conclusions are deferred until every angle has been examined. Afterwards, walking back along rain-darkened pavements, they might remark, almost offhandedly, "We are custodians of uncertainty." The phrase lingers with you. Custodians, not conquerors. Uncertainty, not victory. You begin mentoring those who arrive after you. Only slightly newer, only slightly less accustomed to the building's rhythms, but enough to recognize in them your earlier hesitations. You advise them to read twice before speaking, to observe how decisions are shaped over weeks, not hours, to value discretion above recognition. Responsibility now includes the quiet protection of others' work. If a colleague's report contains an oversight, you flag it privately. If praise is due, you ensure it reaches the appropriate ears without fanfare. The culture of restraint extends to credit as well as critique. There are evenings when you leave the building and pause briefly on the embankment. The city glows softly across the water. Parliament's silhouette stands dignified and still. You feel neither exhilaration nor fatigue, but something steadier, a sense of continuity. The understanding that intelligence is less about moments and more about maintenance. Maintenance of awareness. Maintenance of relationships. Maintenance of perspective. The files on your desk are thicker now, the ribbon tied around them more symbolic than necessary, yet tradition persists. You untie, review, retie, each action deliberate, each decision recorded with care. You encounter complexity that resists tidy conclusion, conflicting reports, ambiguous motivations. You learn not to force coherence where it does not yet exist. Instead, you document degrees of confidence, articulate scenarios, acknowledge limitations. The humility embedded in this approach becomes instinctive. In quiet internal reviews, your assessments are examined. Questions are posed gently but firmly. What alternative explanation have we considered? How resilient is this conclusion over time? You welcome the scrutiny. It sharpens rather than undermines. Your travel continues intermittently, though it feels less novel now. You pack efficiently. You notice small details in foreign cities, the tone of local news broadcasts, the cadence of political speeches, the mood conveyed in ordinary conversation. These impressions inform your thinking, not dramatically but subtly, adding texture to written analysis. There are days when progress seems invisible, weeks when developments stall. Yet, even in stagnation, you sense movement beneath the surface. Intelligence work resembles the river outside your window, often appearing still, yet always in motion. You grow more comfortable with delayed gratification. The outcome of your work may not be visible for years. Sometimes it may never be visible at all. The satisfaction lies not in recognition, but in contribution. The quiet knowledge that careful judgment can prevent miscalculation. One evening, reviewing a briefing destined for senior officials, you pause before finalizing a paragraph. The phrasing must be exact, neither alarmist nor complacent. You adjust a single word, then another. The difference is almost imperceptible, yet significant. Precision becomes a form of stewardship. The clock chimes again, softer now in the near-empty corridor. You close your notebook and sit back, aware that your role has shifted from apprentice to practitioner. Not yet leading, not yet deciding at the highest level, but trusted to interpret, to represent, to uphold the standards you once only observed. Outside, the rain continues its gentle rhythm. London carries on, taxis gliding through wet streets, lights reflecting in puddles, conversations murmured behind drawn curtains. Within the discreet walls of the service, you settle into the understanding that early responsibility is less about authority and more about reliability. You are becoming someone others depend upon, not loudly, not ceremoniously, but steadily. And in this steadiness, your path forward begins to take shape, guided not by ambition in the dramatic sense, but by the quiet accumulation of trust earned day by measured day. By the time your name is spoken in rooms you have not yet entered, you hardly notice the transition. It has happened gradually, through years of considered judgment, through sentences crafted with restraint, through decisions made without display. Now, when you review a file tied neatly with ribbon and marked for your attention, you understand that the responsibility resting within it is no longer shared in quite the same way. It sits calmly and unmistakably with you. The office feels different at this stage of your career, not grander, not larger, but quieter. You close the door more often, not to exclude, but to think. The Thames continues its patient course outside the window, and in its steady movement you recognize something familiar. The sense that influence need not be visible to be real. As an experienced case officer, your work centers on relationships, though you rarely use that word aloud. Relationships sound informal. What you cultivate is steadier than that. Durable lines of trust built over years, maintained through consistency rather than persuasion. Meetings unfold in understated settings, a diplomatic residence with high ceilings and muted carpets, a private room in a well-worn London club where conversation never rises above a civil murmur, a discreet office abroad where sunlight filters through tall shutters. You sit comfortably, neither imposing nor retreating, aware that your authority does not need announcement. You have learned that people reveal themselves in increments, that confidence grows not from pressure, but from predictability. You arrive on time. You remember details previously shared. You never overreact. Over time, this calm constancy becomes your signature. There are long conversations in which nothing overtly significant is said. Yet you leave with a clearer understanding than before, a subtle shift in tone, a hesitation where there was once certainty, an emphasis that suggests deeper currents. Your skill now lies in perceiving these gradations without dramatizing them. Back in London, you reflect carefully before committing impressions to paper. You resist the temptation to sharpen ambiguity into false clarity. Instead, you describe nuance with care. There is a discernible shift in emphasis. Confidence appears moderated. Phrases that honor complexity rather than flatten it. You are trusted with greater discretion. Fewer people are aware of the full scope of your portfolio. Information reaches you directly, sometimes quietly, without circulation. The weight of confidentiality deepens, yet it no longer feels burdensome. It feels integrated, part of the fabric of your days. Leadership at this level is rarely formal. You may not always hold the most senior title in the room, yet colleagues look to you when discussions grow uncertain. You have cultivated a steadiness that reassures. When others speculate too quickly, you gently reintroduce balance. When conversation stalls, you ask a question that reframes rather than challenges. Mentorship becomes more intentional. Younger officers seek your perspective. They sit across from you at polished tables, notebooks open, mirroring the posture you once held. You offer guidance without grand pronouncements. Take your time. Avoid early conclusions. Let patterns emerge. Your tone remains even, never urgent. There are moments of quiet strain. Relationships you have tended carefully may falter. International contexts shift. Political climates cool or warm without warning. You respond not with visible frustration but with recalibration. Strategy, you have learned, is not a rigid plan but a living structure, adjusted thoughtfully as circumstances evolve. On certain evenings, long after others have left, you remain at your desk reviewing correspondence from abroad. The building settles into near silence. The air hums faintly with ventilation. You lean back, eyes resting briefly on the reflection of city lights shimmering on the river. With experience comes a more intimate understanding of consequence. A misjudged phrase can reverberate. An overlooked inconsistency can widen over time. This awareness does not produce anxiety, it produces discipline. You read once, then again. You allow drafts to rest before final approval. Travel feels different now as well. Familiar cities greet you not as assignments but as extended contexts. You notice changes that others might miss. A shift in mood at a regular venue, a new caution in a long-standing contact's voice. These subtleties inform your judgment more than any single dramatic event. There is satisfaction in continuity, in knowing that a relationship maintained over years can weather temporary strain, in recognizing that trust, once established, deepens quietly with each consistent interaction. The service's culture of restraint becomes second nature. You no longer consciously moderate your tone. Moderation is instinctive. Praise remains understated. Critique remains measured. Decisions are rarely celebrated, merely implemented. You attend internal strategy sessions in rooms lined with maps and briefing folders. Discussion moves deliberately, without theatrics. You contribute insights grounded in experience rather than speculation. When consensus forms, it does so gradually, almost organically. At this stage, emotional discipline becomes essential. You encounter perspectives that challenge your own. You absorb frustrations voiced by partners abroad. You hold confidences that cannot be shared. Through it all, you maintain composure, not as suppression, but as steadiness. There are rare instances when outcomes align precisely with your long-held assessments. Quietly, you acknowledge the satisfaction. Yet you do not linger in it. The work continues. It always continues. You begin to see your career not as ascent, but as widening perspective. Early on, you focused on accuracy. Now, you focus equally on timing, when to advance a conversation, when to let it rest, when to escalate gently, when to wait. Waiting, again, proves its worth. The Thames at dusk mirrors the sky in muted tones of blue and silver. You pause occasionally at the window, not in contemplation of grandeur, but in recognition of continuity. The city has endured centuries of uncertainty with composure. In your own way, you contribute to that endurance. Colleagues from other departments seek your counsel more frequently. You listen carefully, aware that your words carry influence. You avoid absolutes. You offer perspective shaped by years of attentive observation. Often, that is enough. The files on your desk are fewer now, but heavier in implication. You untie the ribbon slowly, aware that each page reflects accumulated trust, not only in you, but in the system that supports your judgment. There are evenings when fatigue settles gently across your shoulders. Not exhaustion, but the quiet weariness of sustained attention. You make tea. You stand for a moment by the window. You remind yourself that steadiness is more valuable than speed. As an experienced case officer, you understand that authority is most effective when understated. You do not need to assert expertise. It is recognized. You do not need to command attention. Your measured tone invites it. In a quiet meeting one afternoon, a senior colleague remarks, "We must think in years, not days." The sentence resonates deeply. Years. The horizon of your thinking has lengthened. Immediate developments matter, but only as part of broader arcs. You return to your desk and begin drafting a long-term assessment, weaving together strands gathered patiently over time. The prose is careful, unadorned, precise. You consider how it will read not tomorrow, but months from now. Outside, evening descends softly over London. Lights flicker on along the embankment. The river continues its patient flow. In the near-silent corridor, your footsteps echo lightly as you leave for the night. There is no dramatic conclusion to the day, only the knowledge that your role now carries a quiet gravity, the kind built through consistency, through discretion, through years of choosing restraint over display. And with that gravity comes a broader horizon still, one that extends beyond individual relationships toward the architecture of the service itself. The light in your office is rarely bright. It is deliberate, a softened glow from a shaded lamp that rests upon a wide desk polished to a muted sheen, the kind of surface that reflects outlines rather than details. Beyond the tall windows, the Thames curves through the evening, its surface dark and composed, carrying the reflections of Parliament and distant bridges without distortion. Years have folded quietly into one another, and you now sit not at the edge of decision-making, nor solely within it, but above its steady current. Senior management does not announce itself with ceremony. It arrives with a change in perspective. The files placed before you are fewer in number, yet broader in scope. They contain not only individual assessments or relationships, but intersecting strands of policy, diplomacy, and long-term strategy. Where once you examined nuance within a single thread, you now consider the tapestry as a whole. Your mornings begin earlier. London at dawn has a particular stillness. Buses not yet crowded, pavements washed clean by night rain, the river almost silver in first light. You arrive before most others, not from urgency but from preference. The quiet allows space for uninterrupted thought. On your desk lie briefings marked for senior review. You read them slowly, pencil in hand, not to correct grammar, but to test coherence. Does this analysis align with broader understanding? Does its tone match its evidence? Have we accounted for unintended consequences? The questions are gentle, yet rigorous. Meetings at this level take place in rooms that are comfortable but unadorned. Long tables, high-backed chairs, walls that have absorbed decades of measured conversation. There are no raised voices here. Disagreement, when it arises, is expressed in calibrated terms. I wonder whether we might consider becomes a pivot point for reframing an entire approach. You are conscious now that your presence shapes the atmosphere. If you remain composed, others follow. If you speak sparingly, others weigh their words more carefully. Authority, you have learned, is not projection. It is containment, holding complexity without allowing it to spill into haste. The scope of responsibility has widened beyond individual operations. You oversee portfolios, budgets, staffing decisions that affect careers and families. The weight of these considerations rests differently than analytic judgment. It requires empathy balanced with institutional necessity. Young officers sit across from you during performance reviews, their posture attentive, hopeful. You remember your own early hesitations. You offer feedback that is candid but encouraging. Develop your patience. Guard your credibility. Choose steadiness over visibility. You see in them the future continuity of the service. Diplomatic engagements now carry broader implications. Conversations with counterparts from allied services unfold with careful choreography. There is warmth, but it is measured. There is trust, but it is tested continually through consistency. You speak not only for yourself, but for an institution whose strength lies in reliability. Often, you find yourself translating between worlds, the analytical and the political, the operational and the strategic. You ensure that nuance survives upward briefings, that uncertainty is not simplified into false certainty. You act as a buffer against overstatement, a guardian of proportion. The rhythm of oversight is distinct. Crises may flicker at the edges of awareness, yet your response remains deliberate. You gather perspectives. You allow space for informed debate. Decisions are made not in isolation, but after quiet consultation. Late afternoons stretch into evening more frequently now. The building grows hushed as desks empty. You remain, reviewing summaries prepared for ministers, ensuring language is precise yet balanced. A single misplaced adjective can tilt interpretation. You revise lightly, preserving the author's voice while aligning it with institutional clarity. There are moments when the magnitude of information crossing your desk becomes apparent. A convergence of geopolitical shifts, emerging technologies, diplomatic recalibrations. You resist the temptation to see patterns too quickly. Experience has taught you that history unfolds in layers, not leaps. At this level, restraint is not only personal, it is cultural stewardship. You safeguard the service's tone, you discourage alarmism, you discourage complacency. You cultivate a climate in which thoughtful dissent is welcomed and consensus is earned, not imposed. From your window, you watch weather systems roll across London, rain giving way to brief sunlight, then to mist that softens the skyline. The city endures through fluctuation, as does your work. You think often, in decades now, considering how today's decisions will resonate long after individual names have rotated through offices. In quiet strategy sessions, maps are unrolled across tables, not to dramatize but to contextualize. You trace implications with a finger, speaking calmly about trajectories rather than events. Over time, you say frequently. Time has become your primary lens. There are evenings when you walk the corridor alone, footsteps muted against carpet. Framed photographs of predecessors line the walls, their expressions composed, their eras distinct yet continuous. You feel less like an individual actor and more like a custodian within a long lineage. Responsibility at this level includes protecting the service from itself, from fatigue, from overextension, from the subtle erosion of standards. You advocate for rest when needed, for measured expansion rather than sudden growth, for investing in training that reinforces patience over spectacle. The culture of quiet competence must be maintained intentionally. You model it daily. Emails written without flourish. Meetings concluded without theatrics. Praise delivered privately. Correction offered constructively. When international developments accelerate, as they sometimes do, you absorb the urgency without amplifying it. Your tone remains even. We will assess thoroughly, you say. We will proceed proportionately. Colleagues draw steadiness from your cadence. Occasionally, you attend briefings at the highest levels of government. The rooms are formal, yet the atmosphere remains restrained. You present analysis clearly, avoiding conjecture. You answer questions directly, acknowledging uncertainty where it exists. Confidence here is expressed not through certainty, but through transparency. Returning to your office after such sessions, you often pause by the window. The river below moves as it always has, indifferent to headlines. You feel neither elation nor apprehension, but a sober awareness of scale. The work of oversight is less about individual accomplishment and more about preserving institutional integrity. Files accumulate again on your desk: budget proposals, strategic reviews, long-term forecasts. You untie their ribbons with familiar care. Each document represents months of effort from teams who trust your judgment. You read attentively, mindful that your decisions ripple outward. In conversations with peers, you speak more of sustainability than of success. Can we maintain this over time becomes a guiding question. Short-term gains hold little appeal if they undermine durability. Evenings grow later. The building settles into near silence. Cleaning staff pass quietly. You remain seated, reviewing one final memorandum. The desk lamp casts a warm circle of light, beyond which the office recedes into shadow. Within that circle lies the present, beyond it, the unfolding future. Senior management is not dramatic, it is cumulative. It requires absorbing complexity without transmitting anxiety. It demands decisions made with composure, communicated with clarity, implemented with restraint. As you gather your papers and switch off the lamp, London's skyline glimmers softly across the Thames. You understand that your vantage point has risen, but the principles remain unchanged: patience, discretion, long-term thinking. The horizon extends further still now, towards stewardship not merely of operations or strategy, but of the service itself. The city is nearly silent at this hour. From your office, high above the slow curve of the Thames, London appears less like a capital and more like a constellation. Bridges strung with quiet light, windows glowing faintly across the water, the great buildings of state resting in dignified shadow. Rain drifts in fine silver lines against the glass, softening edges, blurring reflections, rendering the skyline contemplative rather than grand. You have long since stopped counting the years. Executive leadership does not feel like a rival. It feels like widening stillness. The decisions that reach you now are fewer in number, but immense in implication. They concern not only current assessments or diplomatic posture, but the direction of the service across decades yet to unfold. Your desk is broad, its surface uncluttered. A single lamp casts a gentle amber circle across neatly arranged folders. Each file has passed through many capable hands before arriving here. You are not asked to examine every detail, only to determine whether the whole stands steady. In the quiet of evening, you read slowly. You consider whether the service is positioned wisely for a world that shifts not only politically, but technologically, socially, environmentally. You think in arcs of 10, 15, 20 years. You ask yourself whether the culture of restraint you inherited will endure pressures for speed and spectacle. Stewardship is your primary task now. You are custodian not merely of information, but of ethos. Meetings at this level are conducted with even greater simplicity. A long table, a pot of tea. Senior colleagues seated with the ease of familiarity earned over years of shared responsibility. Conversation is measured, deliberate. There is space between sentences. There is time for reflection before reply. When you speak, you do so quietly. The room adjusts itself around your cadence. You are aware that your tone sets more than direction. It sets temperature. If you remain composed, the institution remains composed. You no longer involve yourself in individual relationships abroad, yet you remain deeply aware of them. They form the underlying architecture of the service. You consider how trust must be maintained across generations, how credibility once lost is rarely regained quickly. Your correspondence extends to the highest levels of government. Briefings are precise, balanced, free from drama. You resist simplification when nuance is required. You insist on clarity when ambiguity might otherwise be convenient. In private moments, you reflect on the early days of your career, the quiet corridors, the careful drafting of reports, the first tentative contributions to meetings. You see now how those foundations shaped everything that followed. Listening before speaking, patience before action, restraint before display. The building itself seems to breathe differently at night. Footsteps echo faintly in distant corridors. A door closes softly somewhere below. The lift hums, then settles. You remain at your desk, aware that leadership often requires solitude, not isolation, but space for undistracted thought. You think about succession, not in terms of departure, but continuity. Who among the current generation embodies steadiness? Who understands that influence is most powerful when understated? You consider how to cultivate them, how to protect the culture from erosion by haste. Occasionally, external pressures mount, calls for quicker answers, louder declarations, more visible posture. You absorb these requests without agitation. You know that the strength of the service lies in its refusal to chase attention. It operates best in measured tempo, aligned with long-term national interest rather than transient headlines. You attend formal briefings where the stakes are considerable, yet the tone remains calm. You present conclusions with appropriate confidence, acknowledging uncertainty where it persists. You decline to dramatize. In doing so, you reinforce the service's reputation for sobriety. After such engagements, you often return to your office and stand briefly by the window. The Thames moves steadily below, carrying reflections of history and present alike. You consider how many leaders before you have looked out across this same river, weighing decisions that would never be publicly attributed to them. There is comfort in that anonymity. Executive leadership carries no applause. It carries weight, quiet, constant, enduring. You oversee not only strategy but welfare. You ensure that officers posted abroad are supported, that families are considered, that the institution does not demand more than it can responsibly sustain. Longevity, you have learned, depends upon balance. In late-night reviews, you examine proposals for structural change, technological adaptation, recruitment strategies, training evolution. You ask always, does this strengthen our capacity for careful judgment? Does it preserve discretion? Does it enhance resilience over time? If the answer is uncertain, you request further thought. You have become comfortable with deferral when necessary. Action has its place, but so does pause. In a world inclined toward immediacy, you defend deliberation. The rain against the window intensifies briefly, then softens again. London's lights shimmer on the water, steady despite distortion. You feel a quiet gratitude, not for position but for perspective. There are moments late at night when you sit alone with the accumulated awareness of secrets held across decades. They do not feel dramatic. They feel heavy with responsibility. You understand more than most how fragile stability can be, how easily misjudgment can ripple outward. And yet, you remain calm, because you have seen how patience prevents escalation, how measured language tempers reaction, how quiet diplomacy sustains peace more reliably than visible force. You think of the younger officers drafting reports under soft desk lamps, perhaps pausing as you once did to consider a single word. You hope they feel the same steady sense of purpose, not excitement, not fear, but necessity. The clock in the corridor chimes gently. You close the final folder of the evening and rest your hands lightly upon the polished wood. Outside, the river continues its unhurried course toward the sea. You understand now that to be at the highest rank within the service is not to command in dramatic fashion, but to safeguard continuity, to absorb uncertainty without transmitting alarm, to hold secrets without allowing them to harden the heart. Leadership, at its most refined, is quiet. It is the maintenance of standards no one outside may ever fully see. It is the preservation of trust built over generations. It is the steady refusal to sacrifice long-term stability for short-term display. You switch off the lamp. The office settles into darkness, save for the muted glow of the city beyond the glass. London breathes, composed and enduring. And you, custodian of an institution defined by restraint, leave the room as you entered it years ago, without spectacle, without announcement, carrying forward the same quiet responsibility that first revealed itself in the sound of rain against tall windows. You let the door settle behind you with the smallest sound, and you take a moment, not to listen for anything in particular, but because you have learned that moments are where you can place the weight down, briefly, without anyone noticing. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes with years of discretion, one that does not arrive with sharp edges, but with a soft, even pressure, like a coat worn so long it has taken the shape of your shoulders, and you carry it without thinking, until, now and then, you become aware of its warmth and its weight at the same time. You move along the corridor without haste, not because you are trying to be quiet, but because quietness has become a natural speed, and you find that your body understands the pace your mind has practiced for decades, measured, unhurried, unprovoked by the world's insistence on immediacy. Somewhere, far behind the closed doors and the settled lights, the day's work continues without you, simply because it always continues, carried by others in their own steady way, and you do not feel the need to hold it all personally, because you have long since learned the difference between responsibility and possession. Responsibility is not owning the weight. It is ensuring it can be carried. As you walk, your thoughts do not chase each other. They drift, and they settle, and they return, the way memory does when it is no longer asked to justify itself. You think of conversations that never left the rooms they happened in, of names spoken once and then filed away, of decisions made in tones so calm they might have been mistaken for indifference by someone who had never learned what restraint truly contains. You remember, in a gentle way, how early in your career you imagined the cost of secrecy would be dramatic, a single sacrifice, a single profound moment, and how, instead, it revealed itself as something quieter and more continuous, the small, repeated choice not to share, the habit of pausing before speaking, the subtle reshaping of friendships so that the parts of you that could be spoken aloud became the parts you offered most often. It has not made you colder. It has made you more careful with warmth. There are people in your life who have known you for years and still do not quite know where your days go, only that you return with a certain composure, and that you do not complain in the common ways. they have learned not to press. You have learned to offer what you can: a steady presence, a remembered birthday, a polite inquiry that is sincere, without crossing the invisible lines that keep other lives safe. You used to think of those lines as walls. Over time, they have felt more like boundaries in a garden, there not to shut the world out, but to keep certain things growing undisturbed. In quiet moments, you consider what it means to be trusted with so much and praised for so little, and you realize that the absence of public acknowledgement has been oddly liberating. There is no appetite for performance, no requirement to be seen. You have been allowed to become the sort of person who can do necessary things without needing applause to make them feel real. And yet, the human part of you has not vanished. It has simply learned to find its reward elsewhere. In the almost imperceptible easing of a tense conversation, in the sense that a complicated situation remained manageable because it was approached with patience. In the knowledge that you said, "We don't know," when others might have preferred certainty, and that honesty prevented a misstep later. These are quiet satisfactions, and they suit the life you have built. You have watched colleagues come and go, each with their own style of steadiness, each with their own private way of carrying what cannot be discussed. Some left for ordinary reasons: family, fatigue, a desire for sunlight and predictability. And others stayed not out of obsession, but out of a particular compatibility with this work, this tempo, this manner of holding responsibility without letting it become spectacle. You have learned not to judge either choice. Longevity is not virtue. It is simply a path that fits or does not. There are times now when you look back and notice how your sense of self has shifted almost imperceptibly around the demands of the role. Not in a way that feels like loss exactly, but in a way that resembles maturity, the quiet acceptance that not every thought needs an audience, that not every experience needs to be shared to be meaningful. The world has grown louder over the years. The pace of headlines, the appetite for instant explanation, the habit of turning every complexity into a talking point. You have watched that from within a culture that still prefers to speak softly and at length, to consider rather than to declare, to wait until a sentence can be supported by something firmer than instinct. Sometimes you have felt slightly out of time with the world, and sometimes you have felt grateful for it, because there is a steadiness in refusing to hurry, and you have come to see that calm is not merely a personal preference. It is an institutional necessity, a discipline that keeps judgment clean and prevents reaction from becoming policy. Even so, you are aware of the emotional cost of living this way. Not pain, precisely. More a thinning at times of the ordinary sense of being known. You have sat in pleasant rooms at dinners where conversation moved freely, where people spoke with ease about their days, and you have smiled and offered your own careful version, truthful in tone, sparse in detail, and you have felt occasionally like a guest in your own life, present but quietly edited. It is not loneliness in the dramatic sense. It is simply the knowledge that some parts of your days belong to silence, and you have made peace with that, mostly by recognizing what that silence protects. Not only secrets and sources and methods, but also the possibility of trust, the sort that endures because it is not mishandled. As time has passed, you have found yourself thinking less about titles and more about the less visible forms of responsibility, the environment you leave behind in meetings, the clarity you insist upon in writing, the way you hold a junior colleague's uncertainty without dismissing it. These are not items on a formal agenda, yet they shape the institution more than any single policy paper. You have also become aware, in quieter hours, of how you have been shaped by the city itself not as scenery, but as rhythm. London teaches a certain composure. It carries history without constantly announcing it. It adapts without fuss. It contains multitudes while still managing most days, to feel slightly reserved, as if it prefers not to reveal too much too quickly. You have learned from that. To hold complexity without display, to allow time to do its work, to trust that steadiness can outlast the noisy moment. And now, with the day finished, you sense the larger span of your career not as a series of milestones but as a slow, continuous deepening of the same principles. The early lessons did not vanish as you rose. They became more refined. Listening became more strategic. Restraint became more protective. Patience became less about waiting and more about choosing the right moment to move, gently, without forcing the world to hurry. You notice, too, that the internal voice you once used for work has become the voice you use for life. Measured, balanced, considerate, never rushing to judgment. It is not a facade. It is simply what you have practiced most. There is an understated dignity in that, and perhaps also a small private tenderness in the way you have learned to care without announcing that you care. As you continue on, your breathing remains steady, your steps unforced, and you allow yourself to think of the people who will take your place someday, not with the sharpness of endings but with the softness of continuity. They will sit at desks and choose words carefully. They will learn to live with silence. They will carry responsibility beyond titles, beyond recognition, in the same quiet way. The institution will continue, not because it is unchanging, but because it knows how to change without losing its tone. And you, in your own quiet way, have contributed to that. Not by being remembered publicly, but by leaving behind a culture that still values calm over noise, clarity over flourish, and patience over the illusion of quick certainty. The day recedes and you let it go. There is no need to hold it tightly now. You carry forward only what is necessary, the habit of measured thought, the steadiness of long perspective, and the quiet understanding that discretion, though it asks something of you, has also given you something in return. A life shaped by purpose that does not need to shout to be real. And as your thoughts slow, you allow them to become less about what you must do and more about what you have already learned. That the truest form of responsibility is not intensity, but endurance, and that endurance, when practiced gently, can feel almost like rest.